All right, let's dive into a question that every single GP trainee needs to have a rock-solid answer for, especially if you've got the AKT on your mind. When can my child go back to school? We're going to break down all the official childhood exclusion rules you need to know.
You know this question. You hear it all the time. But it's so much more than just a simple query from a parent, right? It's really a test of your grasp on public health guidelines. Getting this right gives parents confidence and, honestly, shows you're on your way to being a great GP. And that's the bottom line. This isn't just about what you do day to day in the clinic. For all of you in the middle of AKT revision, listen up, because this is super high-yield stuff. Examiners absolutely love these specific, guideline-based questions, so let's make sure you've got these answers completely locked in.
Okay, let's start with the easiest bucket, the conditions where you can look a parent in the eye and confidently say, nope, your child doesn't need to stay home for this. Just think of this as your green light list.
Now, some of these might actually surprise you. Things that cause a lot of worry, like conjunctivitis, slapped cheek, and even hand, foot, and mouth disease. They're all on this no exclusion list. The official line is, as long as the child feels well enough to be there, they can go to school. That is a massive piece of info for reassuring those anxious parents.
Moving on to our next group of illnesses. These are the ones that need a short, very specific amount of time away from the classroom. The clock usually starts ticking based on treatment or when symptoms clear up. Let's call these the short-stay conditions.
And this slide lays out the key differences perfectly. Over on the left, you've got scarlet fever, a straightforward 24-hour exclusion, but, and this is key, after starting antibiotics. On the right, it's 48 hours, but you've got to notice the fine print because that's crucial for your exam answers. For DNV, it's 48 hours after symptoms have totally settled. For impetigo, it's 48 hours after you start the antibiotics. It's all about those little details.
Okay, now for those classic childhood viruses. You know the ones. These guys need a little longer on the sidelines, usually somewhere around 4 to 5 days. We can think of this as the midweek wait.
First up, let's just burn this number into our brains. 4.
That number 4? That's your magic number for measles. The rule is super clear. You exclude for 4 days, and the clock starts from the moment that classic rash appears. Not from the fever, not from the cough, from the rash. That's a classic exam trip-up.
And what's our next key number? You got it, it's 5.
So, 5 days applies to both rubella and mumps. But, and you knew there was a but, you have to pay close attention to the starting point. For rubella, it's 5 days from when the rash starts. For mumps, it's 5 days from the onset of those telltale swollen glands. These tiny distinctions are absolute gold for exam questions.
All right, let's get into the really juicy, high-yield stuff. These are the tricky ones, the conditions with variable rules. This is exactly the kind of knowledge that pushes your AKT score from good to great. You can bet these are exam favorites.
First on our list is whooping cough, or pertussis. The absolute critical point to remember here is that your advice, well, it all comes down to one single thing. Has the child started antibiotics or not? And just look at this difference. It is massive. If they're on antibiotics, they only need to be kept home for 2 days after starting them. If they're not on antibiotics, they have to be excluded for a full 21 days from when the symptoms first started. That is a gigantic clinical difference, and you can see why it's a classic exam question.
Now, for another all-time classic, chickenpox. And the most important thing I can tell you is to forget about counting days. Just forget it. The rule for chickenpox isn't about time, it's about what you see. It's all about the spots.
And this is the definitive advice, straight from Public Health England. You might hear people talk about a 5-day period, but the absolute non-negotiable rule is that all lesions must be crusted over. If an exam question makes you choose between 5 days and all lesions crusted over, the crusted over answer is the correct, more precise one every single time.
So let's just quickly round out these special cases. For scabies, it's pretty simple. They can go back to school after that first treatment is done. For the flu, it's more about your clinical judgment. They can go back once they've recovered. And hey, remember impetigo? We talked about the 48-hour rule with antibiotics, but there is an alternative. They can also return once the lesions are all crusted and healed, which is really useful to know if antibiotics aren't in the picture.
Phew. Okay, we've covered a lot of ground. So how do we pull this all together so it actually sticks in your brain for revision? Well, with the perfect summary slide, of course. Let's take a look at the complete revision table.
And here it is, everything we've just talked about all in one neat table. Seriously, this is your pause and screenshot moment. You've got your no exclusion group at the top, the timed rules linked to treatment or symptoms, the rash and swelling-based rules, and those all-important nuanced cases like chickenpox and whooping cough. This slide right here is your key to absolutely nailing this topic for the AKT.
And we'll finish on this thought. Knowing the guidelines, that's one thing. That's the science. But the real art of general practice is how you explain all this. How do you manage the expectations of an anxious parent? How do you explain why their child with chickenpox has to stay home until every single last spot is crusted over? That's the challenge that takes you beyond just passing an exam and turns you into a truly fantastic clinician.